Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we're going to review one of the newest beloved Gibson guitars that they've made in a long time. This is the 2019 59 60th anniversary. So they're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the 1959, and this was done last year in 2019. And there have been so many requests for me to review this one, so even though I didn't do it in the initial year, here it is today in 2020. I knew I wanted to find one that was super special, so not only are we going to discuss this today, but we also get to discuss the NAMM Show Display models because this was on display in California at that very pivotal point in Gibson history. As with every 59 reissue, every year they revamp something, make it a little bit closer that makes people buy all the new ones. But this year they changed a bunch of stuff that's like really minute details that you'll really only appreciate if you know like the original burst specs. I'm not a big 59 reissue guy. I prefer the prehistorics. Even though they're not as accurate, they're kind of from the 80s. They're kind of cool because it's the first time that they started doing them. But this is a really cool guitar. So let's go ahead and go over all the changes that they did. The first thing they did is they made the Gibson logo slightly less slanted because in previous years it was just a little bit too crooked, so they flattened that out a little bit. And they also changed the Les Paul script logo. I believe they moved it up a little bit, and they also kind of changed the font up. At NAMM, they were saying they made it a little bit more spaghetti-like, and they took some brown out of the hue. So it's more so like a golden brass color instead of like the blinding yellow as like the Les Pauls that you'll find in the USA shop. They tinted the inlays on these guys so it would match that vintage original spec finish, and they also offered these in Indian or Bolivian rosewood fretboards. Now, that's kind of one of those things that a lot of people don't ever stop to think about. Bolivian rosewood is kind of a fancy way of saying Pau Ferro, and you gotta remember, in early 2019, we were still under all those CITES restrictions. So it's possible that that either or was more so, if you bought this overseas, it had the Pau Ferro fretboard, so we could actually get it out of the country easier. So no, these do not have Brazilian rosewood, which would be a spec you would have to have for a true 59, but that's like one of the only things that they didn't get right here. Next up are the pickups. They've kind of completely changed them to get them as close to 59 tone as humanly possible. At least, you know, that's what they tell you every year. So in this iteration, it's the custom bucker with Alnico 3 pickups, but they have not potted them. And what does that even mean? They talk about it like it's a good thing. Some people actually think it's a bad thing because depending on what type of distortion settings you have, these will squeal. They pot the pickups in wax in order to prevent that squealiness. But when you do wax pot a pickup, it also changes its tonal properties. So it's kind of a love it or leave it type thing. There's a lot of people like on internet forums that'll go, my 59 reissue keeps squealing on me. What can I do to change that? You pot the pickups. But on the theme of electronics, they changed up the pots they use. It's still 500K CTS, but instead of the linear taper, they switched over to audio taper for pretty much the entire Gibson lineup on these guys. And the reason for that is it has better roll-off control. So on the old style knob, be useful until about 4 or 5, and then it would shut off. Whereas these guys, they're meant to, you know, give you more of a roll-off, so you actually get the, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It just gives you some more tonal opportunities. You don't have to be running it on 10 all the time. True players seem to really appreciate that feature. And they also changed up the caps in here. They're still bumblebees, but they've made them properly instead of just having a facade. So they're true paper and oil caps. And they redid all the plastics on these apparently. They like chemically copied the originals. And you've got the Bakelite binding on here. Another special feature for this year is you get a custom medallion plate back here that has a diamond symbol. But they also include a normal switch plate. As far as the rest of the construction goes, it is a 1-piece mahogany back, 2-piece flame maple top, once again your choice of rosewood fretboards. And everything else is pretty much the same here except for one thing. How many finishes can you choose from in this year? A whopping 10! 10 fancy ways of saying cherry sunburst. Now, some of these finishes are cooler than others, but here's the complete list, which honestly in 2020 was kind of hard to compile. So there's orange sunset fade, cherry tea burst, slow iced tea fade, royal tea burst, factory burst, which is this one. What's kind of unique about this finish that makes it so stunning is they apply an enhancer to the wood body before they put the finish on. But finishing off the list, we have Southern Fade, Kindred Burst, Green Lemon Fade, sunrise T-burst, and finally golden poppy burst. So it's like any type of aging of the original cherry sunburst finish that you want, they offered it. Because as is the nature with the aniline dyes that they use in these things, they will fade over time. And that's how the original ones were as well. So all those color options, they initially started looking something like this, the original factory burst finish. So to sum all things up, it's like the most accurate reissue that they've done to this date, and they changed a bunch of things around. But as far as internet forums are concerned, these are some of the nicest Les Pauls that were currently on the market at the time. So based on that, it wasn't just all marketing hype. They really did change things around for this year, and people really love these instruments. But now for the second topic of today, what happens to all the NAMM Show Display guitars? This is something a lot of people probably don't even realize or they don't even think about. If you go to the NAMM Show, every single piece that you see has already been pre-sold the night before to dealers. At least for the major brands. I'm not sure about the smaller brands if they sell all their stuff off or not. The whole point of the NAMM Show is not only just to show everybody off all the new stuff that they're doing that year, it's also when the dealers meet up with the manufacturers and they talk about pricing for the year, how many that they want to initially order. They're kind of gauging interest of the new models, things like that. I've got a buddy in the band 3 Doors Down. He told me it's kind of like a big drinking party fest. They're all having a great time. He actually invited me to go one time. Maybe I'll have to take him up on that offer. Because it'd be fun to purchase some guitars directly at the show. Like he was the guy that owned that Firebird that everybody wanted. Which I came close to getting. Another interesting one was a one-piece top Brazilian rosewood version of one of these. So, if you're at the NAMM Show and you fall in love with a piece, no, you can't just go up to the Gibson rep and say, I would like to buy this for all this money, because it's already been sold. So it's kind of a wild goose chase to find a NAMM Show model, because you gotta be quick. If there's a particular one you're after, first you have to find which of all the dealers that attended purchased it, and B, find it before somebody else buys it. So if you're a true collector, you know, 2019 was a huge year for Gibson. I think we can see that even now, just 1 year later. And why was it so significant? It's because it was their first year under new ownership after the whole bankruptcy that kind of destroyed the whole Henry Juskowitz era. But another cool fact, it was the first year back at NAMM for Gibson, because in 2018, they only did the Consumer Electronics Show. That was kind of big news when Gibson didn't show up to NAMM in 2018. So this was just a year of reinventing Gibson, and a lot of good publicity came out of this. Because the original collection came out, the modern collection came out. There was a bunch of price cuts. So a Les Paul Standard, instead of costing like $3,600, was now $2,500. Even though it was basically just a rebranded Les Paul Traditional. But it was a step in the right direction. And this was slightly before all the lawsuits and the whole play authentic thing kind of tarnished Gibson's reputation again after all that good publicity. So a 2019 NAMM Show version of a very highly loved guitar like this one, a certain collector's piece. And I mean, look at this super top on this guy. You can actually see this one in all the NAMM Show ones. Pretty much everybody who talked about the 59 standard lineup actually picked this exact guitar up to talk about it. Gibson was even pretty sure that this was going to be a big year for them, so they started doing something new and put a NAMM sticker on the back of the headstock. That tells you it was a NAMM Show piece. And they also put one in the certificate of authenticity. But it's very nice that you can know that it's a NAMM piece just by these stickers. Because here's an old NAMM Show model from the late 70s, I believe 78 or 79. It's what I've called the super standard. If only they put a NAMM Show model thing on this one, I could have known it right away, but it took somebody remembering this from back in the 70s to actually be able to place it as a NAMM Show piece. Alright, so now that we know all about the NAMM Show models and where they go after that show, apparently they actually get shipped back to Gibson and then they ship out to the dealers. But let's go ahead and throw this 59 60th anniversary on the workbench and take an individual look at all these parts and specs. So here we go. Another reason why NAMM Show pieces are usually highly sought after is they use the best stuff on display. Now, out of all the 59 reissues, I think this was one of the most beautiful ones. Because this one's kind of captured a quilt and flame top all within the same piece of wood, so it's kind of interesting in that aspect. All the other ones were just kind of regular flame tops, so this one is super special in that aspect. But let's go ahead and take a look at these parts. Starting things off here are the custom bucker pickups that we had previously talked about. Again, they are unpotted, but on the back they just have the patent applied for water slide decal. You can see that one wasn't quite fully attached. Whoops. I guess now we know why they flake off all the time. If they're not applied properly, that'll happen. So I'll just stick him right there in the cavity. He won't get lost. But inside the neck pickup cavity here, you can see the long neck tenon, and they use the correct hide glue construction. That's kind of a cork sniffery thing. Some people think they can hear the difference between when they use hide glue and when they use the Franklin tight bond. It looks like they got some sort of staining on the binding right there, though. But those are some really clean cavity routes. Usually Gibsons will have a little bit of a frayed edge, but they cleaned those up nicely. Even in the bridge pickup cavity, that's what all the routes should look like in my opinion. Oh, in case you're wondering what this is, that is actually a maple stripe that's put within the neck to cap off the truss rod cavity. If you were to take this black veneer off, you would actually see a little maple line right there as well that gets drilled into. So even if you have an all mahogany Les Paul everywhere, you still have a little bit of maple somewhere. As far as the bridge pickup goes, it's the same stuff, they just applied that water slide decal better. And you're going to notice that these pickup covers actually have a little bit of an aging job to them. This is what they consider VOS, Vintage Original Spec, meaning it's kind of what it would look like after it was played for a little bit. But what I find increasingly interesting is it almost looks like they used gold pole pieces on some of these, or maybe they just have a more heavier aging job to them, because sometimes those will rust on the vintage guitars. And you've got the nice thick cellulose pickup rings right here. They stick up off the body more so than a Gibson USA part. Moving on to the bridge, we have a non-wire ABR1. That means there's no retaining wire over top of these guys, and just says Gibson ABR1 on the back, and it also has the aging job to it. You can actually polish that off if you want to. They haven't actually aged the metal itself. It's kind of like a polishing compound. You can see the same thing on the lightweight aluminum tailpiece. And you're probably wondering, why are the strings wrapped up like that? Some people like to top wrap, some don't. The reason why people do top wrap is they say it makes the strings feel a little bit slinkier, because you're technically extending how much string you have there. Another plus side to top wrapping that people like is they can deck down the tailpiece. That gives them supposedly better sustain. And since the strings don't come out here, you're not going to collapse your bridge because there's less pressure over top of there. It's a personal preference thing. I'm just going to leave it be. But before we move any further, middle position 3.95, so that probably means, yeah, about 8, 7.92. And in the neck position, 7.89, so they're fairly matched right there. But check out these knobs. These are definitely nothing like the Gibson USA version. It's not really showing up in camera very well, but there's almost like a gold powder within them. In person, they've got a little bit of green, but like a bullion goldness to them. They really stand out. So when you see somebody pay, $200 for vintage correct knobs and you think they're crazy, there truly is something to that. And then they also have the thumb bleeders here that are not quite as pointy as the real ones, but still pointy enough they can get you. But basically they were just there to show you where 10 is on the knobs. But people kept cutting their thumbs on them, that's why they get the nickname thumb bleeders. But I just can't get enough of this top. I mean, this top with this factory burst finish, they really did an excellent job of making this a monster top. And there are very few guitars that I would actually consider monster tops. Because you got the dark red here, kind of a light red, then it transitions into this yellow. But that understaining job really just did an awesome job at accentuating the flame on this one. They even do a VOS job to the screws, so if you take those guys out, they look old and rusty. And here is our cellulose pick guard right here, with similar aging job done to the hardware. Something that I really love about this guitar is there's literally no dead spots in this top. I mean, you can look at it from this angle, still see it. Look at it from this angle and see it. The only time it's not quite as impressive is if this guitar is hanging low and you're looking down like this. I mean, you can still see it's figured, but unfortunately for this guy at NAMM Show, he was on one of the bottom rungs, so nobody could even see how beautiful this top was unless they went to the NAMM Show and kind of looked at it at eye level, because everywhere else it's just absolutely gorgeous. So definitely hang this one high up in your collection to truly appreciate the top. Moving on to the fretboard here, once again, it is rosewood with a mahogany neck. We have 22 medium jumbo frets with slightly aged inlays. Now, it's not quite like the Snot Green Classics, but they're kind of getting close there. But this board darkened up very nicely. But when you get it in the light, I just love how also red it is. It kind of reminds me of a Brazilian rosewood fretboard, but it's definitely not Brazilian. But if I'm being honest, I couldn't really tell you the difference anyways, unless it's on the spec sheet. But let's go ahead and grab these neck dimensions. Nut width 1.69 inches, and by the 12th we're looking at 2.05. And what kind of neck do we have on a 59? It starts at 0.9, then at the 12th fret it works its way up to about 0.98, so not overly chunky. 59s are kind of like that beautiful in-between that people like, so they're not super baseball bats, but they're not super thin like some of them can be in the later 60s. Here's a really good visual representation of that. You can see the shape stays about the same. From the 1st fret all the way to the 12th fret, it just gets a little bit wider. So I think that shows you guys why that's kind of the industry standard right there. As far as the scale length goes, typical stuff, 24 3/4. They did make a custom shop long scale though, 25 1/2. So if you're a Fender guy looking for an interesting Les Paul, you could do that. As far as the headstock goes, underneath your truss rod cover, that's what you're left to deal with. I'm not sure why the custom shop always sets the truss rods like that, but apparently that's the norm, and this is what I'm always talking about when I say historic truss rod covers are different. You see how it has that big white bevel around it? Apparently they're only 2-ply and it's really thick. These things always make a guitar look super cool. And here's an up-close look at that new color and script font of the Les Paul model, and the slightly less crooked Gibson logo that they've also aged over to a nice yellowed hue. Moving on to the back here though, beautiful one-piece mahogany body. You can see it's got some nice tight wood grain here. It's been filled in with the aniline dye. It definitely has that really cool vintage look, but what everybody wants to see here is our control cavity. To be honest, I would not say that is Gibson's best soldering work in the world, but it is 50 style wiring with the paper and oil caps like we were talking about earlier. And right here on this little shelf on modern day reissues, you'll actually be able to see what version it is, and that one says R9. I really wish they would have designated the color somewhere because they're all so similar, it's kind of hard to tell what you have, especially since it's not even on the COA. I just love the wood. You can see the flamed figuring even from the back. That's just crazy. That's also how you can tell if vintage gold tops have a flame top underneath. You can look in the back. But the output jack on the side is also plastic. Most Gibson USAs typically use metal because they're less prone to cracking and breaking, but you got your vintage style strap buttons down here and one right here. And nothing too fancy in the toggle switch cavity except for the medallion itself. Now Gibson has been doing medallions on the back of their custom shop guitars since about 2014, but this one's special because it says 60th anniversary and it has a little diamond right here. Now it's not actually a real diamond, it's cubic zirconia. But Gibson did use real diamonds in the 1994 100th anniversary run of guitars. So kind of a cool little feature that these guys get. A feature I really love on this one is the thin binding in the cutaway. That's a historic spec that exposes the maple cap, but it's so heavily quilted and figured that you can actually see it through even in there. But we'll just run along the edges here. You can see a lot of beautiful wood grain here. It's got like a stripiness to it. I truly did stumble upon a fantastic example of one of these to document. Nothing too crazy going on here. Similar mahogany wood grain as we saw on the back, but a little bit tighter, I would say. And here's something that Gibson puts on the back of the headstock, I believe, after the show. It's a little sticker here that's very similar to the one that you'll see within the Certificate of Authenticity. It says Custom Shop Display Guitar. Now, in the sake of full disclosure, the person who had purchased this, he didn't like that, so he had taken it off. I was always wondering what that gunk was back here, and then I saw another NAMM Show display piece from this year on Reverb, and then I saw this attached to some of the case candy over here within the case, and I was like, yo, okay. So I just put it back on here so you can see where they kind of pried it up in a few locations. But that is back where it rightfully belongs, and you have single line, single ring Kluson tuners. So what that's referring to is the single line right here. If you have a double line Kluson, there's like 2 large lines right here that'll say what it is, and then the rings refers to how many rings these guys have. So like in the early 70s, they had a double ring, which looks really cool on the right guitars. But for these guys, it's all about the singles. And the serial number of this display piece was 99039. Now, I believe all the 59 reissues, they start with 9, likely to signify 1959 reissue, and 9 for 2019, and this is how many they made. So this was the 39th one, believe it or not. And here's another reason why people buy historics. They use the lightest weight mahogany possible. This is not chambered, this is not weight relieved, and it only weighs 8 pounds, 6.6 ounces. And believe it or not, some people would actually call this heavy for a historic. There's some people that'll only buy sub 8 pound guitars, which is ridiculous in my book, but I think that is super lightweight for such a beautiful and great guitar. But let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds.
Now that we know all about the 60th anniversary 59 Les Paul, what are my final thoughts on this thing? I hate when reviews have like no negative points, but I mean, what could you really say about the highest end Les Paul reissue that would be bad, you know? The only thing I can really go off of is the price. It is expensive. These things brand new were $6,499, and usually the anniversary models do hold value just a little bit better than the non-anniversary ones. This particular one, I am just in awe over this top and the color. It's just a perfect storm, and the fact that it's also a NAMM showpiece. This is a 100% future collectible guitar. You'll see it for sale in like 30 some years and people will drool over this thing, is what I'm pretty much expecting. But besides the looks, you know, it felt great to play. It felt super comfortable. It's definitely significantly better than a Gibson USA variant. It's not dissing all Gibson USA models either. The Historics, they just have a different feel to it. If you haven't actually got to sit down and truly experience a Historic to justify why you're paying 3 times as much, you definitely should, because there are significant differences in feel. And the way an instrument feels definitely affects the way that you also play it. So is it 3.5 times better than a Gibson USA Les Paul standard? No, but it is probably about 20 to 25% better. So the law of diminishing returns definitely applies to these guys. Pretty much the only negative thing I could say is the squealing pickup. I don't use like super heavy gain. What I use is technically an overdrive pedal. And even at fairly low levels, I was getting that squealing. Not quite as bad as like a microphonic pickup squeal, but very similar. I could see that getting very annoying live, but at the same time, people like the unpotted pickups because you get those really cool overtones. That's like when you hold on to a note and it just rings out forever, and it gets that really very distinctive vintage sound to it. That's what we're talking about here. So it is very authentic sounding in that aspect. But if you really hate it, I mean, you could just take it to anybody and they can wax pot it for you. But if you're in the market for the closest thing to a 59 that the Custom Shop currently makes, I don't think you'll be upset with these guys. But a year after the 59, they did the 60th anniversary of the 1960. We'll do a full review and demo of this one in a different episode. But it's just kind of cool to see the color variations on these guys, as well as just to see them side by side here. But we won't go too much in details on these guys on this episode, so you have to look forward to this one another time. But before we close out here, let's go ahead and check this one out under Blacklight. Oh man, that's really freaky. They must age these knobs somehow because they glow just like vintage originals. That's crazy. Usually the modern plastic stuff doesn't glow, so maybe it's just partially the material that they make them out of. So we get a little bit of a light glowing here. That's probably because, you know, it's been in a display case under a bright light. So as it absorbs the UV lighting, that's why it fluoresces under the black light. So no breaks, cracks, or repairs, but we do have a few cool glowing bits on these guys. I mean, look at those tuner tips. That original case for these guys is a Lifton style that uses the clasps and has a single latch right there. It's basically the most vintage correct one that they can do, but it is not the aged version. You've got that little Gibson badge right here, and on the interior, this is how it differs from like the regular custom shops versus the Historics. Normal custom shops, they'll have the same style, but they will have a double neck rest, which is more protective but less historically accurate. So these guys just have the one neck rest, and you have the Lifton badge right there. But these cases are technically inferior because they're less protective for the guitar. There's less padding right here. You actually have to put a bunch of foam padding in here just to make sure that the thing doesn't slide around, but it's all done in the sake of historical accuracy. Well, we'll take a quick look at the case candy. You get a custom shop tag. You get a regular back plate in case you want to install it. Vintage reissue strings, your case key. This just tells you your serial number, model, tells you you've got Bumblebees, Gibson warranty if you wanted to fill it out. So that was completed very early in 2019, so it was probably actually made in 2018. And our COA here, it is a special booklet. It is gold on the outside and has that same design that's on that back plate. And again, that little NAMM Show sticker and matches up with the serial number. Very cool. But honestly, as far as these Lifton reissue cases go, this one's actually pretty good. The headstock is not touching the ground. Half the time they will be. So they definitely have that jacked up nice and tall. But here you can see what I'm talking about, how they slide around quite a bit without those foam stoppers. So if you think you might be interested in owning a piece of Gibson history here, a 60th anniversary 59 reissue from a very significant NAMM show, I'm sorry, it's already been sold. Somebody contacted me and said, I want that guitar. Which is kind of a shame because I was going to hold on to this one, but it's okay. I don't have a great place to display it right now anyways, but just one last look at this beautiful top. Alright, thank you Troglodytes for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.